when you watch an old movie and you see a huge battlefield full of people, you think, wow, look at all the people they got for this movie. Look at the scale of the production. It must have cost a lot to make this. But when you watch a new movie and you see a huge battlefield, you think, wow, CGI is better than ever. Once CGI became widely used, understood, and expected even, there were certain things that could never again be authentic. This is the somatizing encroachment of the unreal, the real being corrupted or infected by the artificial. I don't mean to sound like an old man. CGI is cool. I got nothing against it. And obviously, movies have always had special effects, and film itself is deeply artificial, but there is still something profound about things that can no longer be authentic. Let's say I were to confess something personal to you right now, to tell you a heartfelt story, to be vulnerable. We might have a different sort of connection for a moment, something sincere and authentic, but at the last second, I add a sarcastic wink that undermines everything that I just said. The piercing authenticity falls into farce. My story is invalidated, and it's impossible for me to ever be authentic again, because you'll always wonder, is he joking? Is he for real? Can I ever be authentic again? Before we go any further, I should mention that what you're watching right now is not a video. As in, I didn't record this with a camera. The image you're looking at, it's not a picture of me, really. This is a deep fake that I trained from my previous videos. The big question about authenticity and the loss of authenticity, the impossibility of authenticity, is not whether it could happen to battle scenes in old movies or to my heartfelt stories, but whether or not it could happen to reality itself. Reality is defined by being unquestionably authentic. But can we take this for granted? Might it someday collapse? Maybe it has already. There are a lot of movies that try to address, ponder, wonder about these sorts of questions. eXistenZ is one of them. That's right, we've come to the subject, the thing I'm actually supposed to be talking about in this video, the 1999 David Cronenberg film, eXistenZ. David Cronenberg is one of my favorite directors. He's made a wide range of movies. Some of them are relatively straightforward, like Eastern Promises or History of Violence. Some of them are quite strange, like Dead Ringers or Crash. No, not that Crash. eXistenZ is rated 6.8 on IMDb, and it's always a little bit tough with David Cronenberg to know if you see one of his movies with a middling rating, is it because the movie's just too weird for the general population? Or was it truly a lull in his output? Obviously, some of his movies are truly better than others. Some people would call David Cronenberg a horror director. Many of his films involve body horror, specifically. But the thing that has defined his work, to me, is his postmodern interest. The film Crash was based on a book. This book by J.G. Ballard. But it's without a doubt worth noting that this book by Jean Baudrillard, Simulacra and Simulation, includes a chapter on this book. And I am almost certain that Cronenberg read this book before making the movie adaptation of this book. This book, by the way, one of the most prophetic and insightful things I've ever read, also very confusing. Crash, by the way, is rated 6.4 on IMDb, but it's a great movie. It's clear that it's just a little bit too far out there for most people. Crash is a film mainly about sort of an underground group of symphophiliacs, people who get sexual stimulation from simulated car crashes. Very graphic film, very odd, but an incredible movie. I might do a video on it sometime. I've wanted to do a video on it for a long time, but there's so much to it, so much to sink your teeth into it, that I've never really been able to get more than just a little start. One final piece of trivia, by the way, is that this book makes a rather lame cameo in The Matrix, which came out the same year as eXistenZ. So anyway, the question is this movie actually good? Is it merely too weird for the general public? Or is it a lesser Cronenberg film to some extent? Well, I'll tell you. I don't think this is one of Cronenberg's best films. It is somewhat more mainstream and accessible than some of his others. It's in some ways it's the accessible version of Videodrome. This T-shirt I'm wearing, by the way, reference to Videodrome. I think I've worn it in many videos, but might not be obvious. I think it should probably be laundered, but I put it on just for this video due to subject matter. Anyway, similar to Videodrome with some updated themes. Rather than television, we have video games, but a lot of the core ideas are pretty similar. I think the reason it's not rated super highly is probably because this is an attempted compromise. It's not as weird as unhinged as I would like it to be, as some of Cronenberg's films are. It's maybe not as incisive as it could be in some ways, but it's probably still a bit too strange, a bit too weird for a lot of people. It has weird moments, it has graphic moments that can be off-putting and can make your head scratch. There are places where it uses sort of traditional action movie ideas, and there are places where it is effective as a traditional action movie, thriller, horror film, something like that. But it doesn't quite deliver on those genres, and that might put people off. That said, I would recommend this movie. All I'm saying is that it's not one of its best, but it is good. There's a lot of depth that this movie can add to the themes I was highlighting at the beginning. eXistenZ may also have a moment of particular relevance right now, given some of the recent buzz about the so-called metaverse. eXistenZ is about the attempted assassination of a game designer who makes virtual reality games. The developer is a woman named Allegra, and she has to go on the run while testing out her latest game. Suffice to say, the lines between what is real and what is not get a bit blurred. I was also worried that this movie might be somewhat dated. I think a good rule of thumb is actually that movies that try to be really with it tend to be the ones that end up seeming the most dated. When you watch a movie that just came out or a TV series that just came out and it seems like, wow, it's like really, it's really gets this new technology stuff. Those ones tend to not age so well. A great example, I think, is Sherlock, which I remember when Sherlock was first on television or whatever, and it seemed really innovative, really interesting how they showed like little text message bubbles to show conversations happening on the phones. It was like, wow, finally, we have cell phones in movies in a meaningful way. That show has not aged particularly well, I would say. Anyway, I was worried that this movie might seem a little bit like an old man yelling at a cloud, or that it might seem like it was trying to really hop on certain buzzwords of 1999, but that it wouldn't be relevant today. But David Cronenberg comes through again. The man is prophetic. And this movie really is fine. There's maybe one scene when talking about the different types of cuts that can happen in a game that seemed a little hokey. But other than that, this movie seems to ring true despite being almost 25 years old. It doesn't seem dated. It doesn't seem to be a cringeworthy look at technology. It seems still incisive, still interesting, unpredictable, still doing new things with these themes that in 1999 were just barely in their infancy. One thing about David Cronenberg is that, one thing about Videodrome, I should say, it's maybe the most forward-thinking movie I've ever seen, the most prophetic movie that has ever been made. It's up there, certainly. This book is one of the most prophetic things that has ever been written. Like I said, it's almost a 25-year-old movie. Really doesn't seem like it. Anyway, Allegra and her accomplice, Ted's played by sort of a young Jude Law, spend most of their time inside of the game, eXistenZ. eXistenZ, by the way, is the name of this game that Allegra has designed. You play the game with a somewhat eerie, fleshy controller referred to as a pod. These are organically grown. This overlap between organic material and technology is another big theme. In many of Cronenberg's films, it often leads to some sort of body horror elements, and that happens again here. A player also has to have a bioport installed at the base of their spine, and there's a fleshy cable that you plug into the back of your spine, connecting the pod into the bioport. The pod leeches off your own energy to power itself. It has no batteries. There's a clear parallel between gaming and sexual penetration here. This is another common Cronenberg theme. When we talk about virtual reality, simulation, artifice, sexuality is almost always caught up in these ideas. We see this in movies, whether it's Blade Runner, where Deckard falls in love with a replicant. But we also see it in real life, although perhaps real isn't the right word. But I suspect that today there might be more virtual reality films that are pornographic than there are virtual reality films that are not pornographic. Maybe you've seen articles about relationships people have formed within the universe of Second Life or some other virtual platform. A lot of interesting manipulations that go on here. Sexuality and promiscuity absolutely have a place in this story and are right at home in this movie. And these connections, by the way, it's not a coincidence that most of Cronenberg's movies tend to involve body horror, tend to involve flesh and technology, and tend to involve sex. These are fundamental ideas of our evolving relationship with technology. When Allegra and Ted enter the game of eXistenZ, the first place they end up is a store that sells games, virtual reality games. And the first thing they do is they play one of these games. To play it, they have another pod. It's a slightly different pod that requires you to have a slightly different bioport drilled into your spine. You plug in the pod to the bioport and you play. That's what they do. Later in the film, Ted and Allegra are playing another game where they are factory workers in a factory that produces pods, a pod farm. What's interesting here is that the virtual world is not trying to hide itself. It's not trying to hide its own artifice. In fact, it's kind of reveling in it. If we think back to our example of CGI in movies, well, if authenticity is so important, then you might think that CGI would always try to be hidden. And in some ways it is. Good CGI maybe should blend in. And some good CGI does. You don't notice it. You never notice it. Little things removed in the background, little modifications, little revealing mistakes fixed, things like that. But a lot of CGI is there to be noticed. A lot of it is a spectacle. And even if you don't notice it in the film, what about the making of featurettes, the behind-the-scenes things used to market a film? When I think about The Lord of the Rings or some of the Star Wars prequels, films from a time when CGI was really taking off, these are movies that, for me at least, are inseparable from their behind-the-scenes featurettes about CGI. When I think about those movies, I just think about those things. They're in the same drawer for me. The spectacle of artifice is a part of it. It's a big part of it. These films are marketed on it, right? It's the reason you go to see movies, is to see the spectacle, right? It's a reason you play games. It's a reason you indulge in artificial, in virtual reality, is to see the spectacle of it and to see the behind the scenes and stuff, to revel in the modernity, in the technology. Look what we have. The jetpack is finally here, perhaps. This movie does a great job enunciating this, showing a virtual world infatuated with itself like a young child running through the tall grass, perhaps exuberantly exploring his body. In some ways, it's maybe like a play within a play. At first, you might wonder why a playwright would ever include a play in a play. Somehow that seems like it's giving away a secret. If we're supposed to believe in the play that we're watching, why is there another play inside of it that reveals that plays themselves are tricks, they're artificial? Isn't that a bit like a magician revealing his secrets? Doesn't it undermine the whole thing? Well, maybe it would if the goal was to create reality. But is reality what we're really trying for? Or is it exactly the opposite of what we're trying for? There's a couple of nice stylistic things in this movie. First of all, Cronenberg absolutely nails the look, the feel, the vibe of the game worlds. And again, for a movie that comes out in 1999, obviously there were video games in 1999. And this kind of harkens back. If I knew more about video games, I never really played video games. If I knew more about video games, I would say, oh yeah, it reminds me of like Quake or something like this. I don't have a great reference point. There's something about it that kind of just reminds you of kind of like maybe like the GoldenEye type thing. The some of the more ambitious games for the N64, the PlayStation original or something. I think that's approximately the correct era. You can kind of see the influence here. He really nails that kind of feel. David Cronenberg is a great visual artist. He's never made a bad-looking movie. Extremely, always knows how to wield a camera. He also gets the acting really right in this movie. It maybe isn't traditional. I can understand how some people would feel like it's slightly hokey in places. But again, it seems to catch the vibe of the game world really well. Another thing that's interesting is that there's some moments of uncertainty that are really nice. At one point, for instance, we learn that some of the characters that we come across in the film are in fact characters in the game, and they're stock characters, so they're just going to repeat the same line over and over, repeat the same actions, repeat the same phrases. There's a moment later in the movie where Allegra pretends for a moment to be a stock character. She just keeps repeating something, and this kind of freaks out Ted because she's supposed to be his companion here. She's supposed to help him out, be his guide. Wouldn't it be a disaster if she was suddenly effaced, suddenly disappeared? Interesting, again, the romantic angle, the virtual romance. But for a moment, it seems like she slipped through his fingers or something and has become virtual. The audience doesn't know what is happening. The audience doesn't know if she's being serious or if she's joking. Turns out she's joking, but there's a moment of uncertainty that Ted experiences and that the audience experiences equally. It's another nice moment when Ted's character is told to explore a certain path. He's told to go to a restaurant and order the special. He wants to get out. He wants to stop, doesn't want to go forward, but Allegra says to him, don't you want to know what the special is? Doesn't that intrigue you? And Ted eventually agrees. Yeah, I do want to know what it is. And watching the movie, I agreed too. I thought, yeah, I want to know what it is. I want to know what's so special about the special. The audience is taken along for the ride in this movie, essentially. And overall, it's a great ride. This is an exciting movie, like I said. Decent action movie, decent horror movie. It's an interesting movie. It's not my favorite Cronenberg movie. It's not the wildest. I don't think it will turn your brain inside out. It has some nice twists. Some of the twists you will see coming. Other twists you will not. That's intentional, I think. This could be a good first Cronenberg for somebody. It could be your favorite Cronenberg film, without a doubt. So I would definitely recommend that you check out eXistenZ. And as part of a new program of trying to end my videos more decisively, that's it.